Welcome back to Talking Trade. I'm Sandi Siegel, president of Dey.
And I'm Ian Coxhead in the Department of Ag and Applied Economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And today we're really happy and indeed proud to have with us Dr. Joe Glauber. Joe had a 30-year career at U.S. Department of Agriculture, including 7 years as USDA chief economist. Prior to that, he also served as the chief agricultural negotiator in the Doha trade round for the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. He's now a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute and a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. And I cannot resist some parochial tub thumping here. Joe is a PhD in Ag Econ from my department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So Joe, we're really proud and happy to welcome you back for this virtual visit to Wisconsin.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Ian.
Today. We have a lot to talk about today, especially with recent changes in administration and impending changes in U.S. ag and trade policy as well. But let's start with a backward glance. If we look at China's 2020 imports of U.S. agricultural products under the so-called Phase 1 trade deal hammered out by the Trump administration, well, the 2020 numbers were very disappointing. U.S. Exports to China fell very far short of the agreed goals. But 2021 has started out much more strongly. Big surge in U.S. ag exports to China, probably led by corn. What do you think's going on there, and what does it mean for U.S. producers and consumers?
Well, it's been a wild few years. I mean, you think back to the trade war. I mean, China up until 2018, it was one of our top markets. And then with the trade war, we saw our exports to China fall from around $20 billion to around $9 billion or so in 2018. 2019 wasn't much better. But with the Phase 1 agreement, particularly in the second half of 2020, you did see a lot of trade going to China. Now, I will argue that a lot of that was because of the rebound in pork production and other things in China, where they were in need of protein meals, so importing a lot of soybeans, and also in need of feed grains. So we saw a lot of corn. Also, remember at the end of 2020, they've had a trade dispute with Australia, so they're not importing a lot of barley from Australia. So if you look at total, feed grain exports to, including distillers dry grains, if you look in 2020, that's around 2.4 billion. Great numbers. So 2020 was a great recovery. I might add, we've exported almost 4 billion back in 2015, if you look at the total numbers for total feed grains and distillers dry grains. But again, a good recovery. 2021, still behind pace of these Phase 1 targets, but you got to remember those were sort of drawn out of the air. I think the main thing is China's back being our #1 export destination, and that's an important thing for U.S. farmers.
Yeah, that's right. Those numbers were pretty unrealistic in the first place, so maybe not a great benchmark, right?
So can I ask Joe, the new trade rep, Catherine Tai, has made it clear that her analysis of Phase 1 will be the first step in deciding whether or not she offers relief on, some of the prohibitive duties on the China tariffs. So, based on the information you just shared as to why we saw success and how much success, do you think there's enough that will warrant some relief on the China tariffs that are impacting us consumers and so many importers?
Yeah, I think two things there. One is, I think again, these numbers, what's driving these exports to China is the fact that China needs these materials. What I don't like about the current situation is, before we had a 3-4% tariff on soybeans. That's a low tariff that commercials get in when they need. Chinese importers need supplies. They go and purchase it, pay the tariff, and bring it into the country. When you have 25% additional tariffs on, like they're currently, they now have to go to the Chinese government and get an exemption to do that. And it just creates all sorts of additional transaction costs. So I'd like to see that, if all possible, we get away from those things and get back to commercial trade flowing. But I'll say this, I think that Catherine Tai's in a tough spot here. You have all these tariffs were put on. Why? Not because of agriculture. Agriculture, actually, we have disputes, but they've pretty much got a lot of those get resolved. We have the phase one agreement that does have a lot of good things in it as far as these bilateral disputes with China. But the main issue has been on intellectual property, business practices, other things outside of agriculture. And I think her dilemma is, how do you take off tariffs without showing some progress there? So I think that's going to be a very careful game that's being played. Thankfully, in the meantime, China needs materials, so they're going to do everything they can to grant those exemptions, allow that trade to come in. But I think there's no question, from an economist perspective at least, I'd like to see us get away from sort of managed trade where we set these trade levels and other things and get back to letting the commercials decide when to import.
Terrific.
Great. The issue with China trade, of course, goes beyond policy and goes to some pretty significant supply chain bottlenecks as well these days. We've got a lot of manufacturers and traders complaining about inability to source goods, inability to ship goods, and accompanying that, some big rises in input prices, iron and steel leading them, and copper, I guess, as well. So what do you think the implications of that are going to be medium term for the Midwest and U.S. economies?
Yeah, no, I mean, you got a couple things going on. You do have all these tariffs on metals, which are, holdovers from the Trump administration. You also have all these disruptions in the global value chain caused by COVID. And I think that we're certainly seeing this with bottlenecks in terms of shortages of container ships, big supply chain bottlenecks that have increased and which are going to continue until we get back into sort of the normal flows and get economies back running. That I think, that hopefully we'll see this get resolved over the next several months. But in the near term, this has been clearly disrupting things, and even down to, I mean, you look at how much paper is being consumed right now in terms of packaging and other sorts of things at the consumer level. Some of this has shown up in food prices. Obviously, we're COVID, because of the supply chain disruptions, saw some of the highest levels of food price inflation that we've seen in a while. I mean, remember, food price inflation for a high food price inflation is 4 to 5% rather than 1 to 2%. Nothing like what we saw in the 70s when we were talking 10 to 15%. But there's a lot of things involved with food prices. I mean, farm value is a small part of it. It's only about 15% of the retail dollar. But things like energy prices are important. And so when you see price spikes in energy markets, you got to get concerned over if they continue over a long time.
So you've been doing this a while and been active and, with the trade reps office and so forth, and seen many administrations, I presume, in your career.
Yeah.
I'm in the trenches. Supply chain has never been so upside down. And, there's recent, concern in the news of our rate of inflation and so forth. I'm seeing freight pricing 2 and 3 times what it was a year ago. In addition to the additional tariffs, on steel, aluminum, as well as China and so forth. So, what's the best advice and strategies, for the trade rep in looking at a holistic view and trying to combat the, inflationary pricing, as well as, again, not giving in too much to some of these issues?
Yeah, what I would say is, that a couple of things. I mean, you understand there's a lot of issues on trade. It's not just China. We still have these steel and aluminum tariffs that were applied on a number of countries for national security reasons, which I think, at least a lot of people, including myself, have some doubts about whether or not that was really a valid reason to be imposing all these tariffs. I think I would start working with our partners to try to get rid of those tariffs, to scale that down, and that includes partners like the EU and Canada and others, and some of those we have already, obviously, but that's the start. the other big issues are just all the disruptions caused by the pandemic, and I'm not sure there's much there the trade rep can do, except for trying to work with other WTO members to try to avoid the sort of problems that countries oftentimes create by putting on things like export restrictions or other sorts of disruptions to trade. So I think and I think the good news is that this administration looks like it's going to be willing to work more with multilateral organizations like the WTO, which in my view is really important here.
And Joe, really quickly, as we're running out of time now, new leadership at the WTO, any evidence that will lead to changes in policy or practice from that end?
Well, I think, the new Director General, Ngozi, is someone who really wants to, doesn't want to take no for an answer. She's working very hard to get an agreement right now on fisheries subsidies. The WTO, having spent a lot of time there myself, it's a difficult place to try to get consensus, and that it's a place that rules by consensus. So you need everyone aboard. But we'll see. There is a ministerial coming up where all the countries will get together and talk about a lot of trade issues, including agriculture, later this year, or towards the end of this year. So we'll get to see. She's just getting her feet set. I mean, the big thing right now to me is solving this problem with the appellate body in dispute settlement, because the U.S. has gained, and U.S. agriculture in particular, we've won almost every case we've taken to the WTO. These are really important things to get that institution back functioning. So hopefully that Catherine Tai and the new DG will be able to work with other members to get an agreement there.
Perfect.
Joe Glauber, we've only scratched the surface of all the possible topics we could talk about, and feel like we've got a long way to go yet, but we're out of time. So Sandi, do you want to say thanks?
Oh, it's a pleasure. Really an honor to talk to you, Joe. And I hope your optimistic point of view is, it is correct.
Yeah, I do too. No, it's great talking to you guys.
Yeah, once again, thanks very much,
Thanks
Joe,
so
and we'll
much.
see you again soon. Yeah, this has been Talking Trade, and we'll see you in the next episode.